And welcome everybody to the Naturally New York Friday webinar, Seed Oil Free Alliance. Super excited to kick off today. I've been in the natural products industry for 28 years, and I've co-founded 6 food and beverage companies, and I've seen a lot over my time. But what I have seen is the growth of more conscious businesses and businesses thinking about how they express themselves and market themselves. Really importantly, based on their ingredients, their supply chains, and sometimes ingredients that you don't know are in products. But overall, when I look at the trends in certifications in particular over the last 28 years, starting with USDA Organic Certified back in November of 2002, which, before that happened, people talked about having organic ingredients, but they couldn't really prove they were organic. And we saw what that certification did to the industry backed by the USDA. We've also seen non-GMO project, gluten-free, fair trade, B Corp, vegan certified, and most recently the Regen Organic certified movement of really being able to give brands and give founders the platforms to speak authentically and transparently and publicly about what's in their products and what's not in their products. And so there's been a lot of chatter, especially in the food side of the industry, but over the last few years about seed oils, a lot of confusion too. And I can tell you, when I first started talking about seed oils 5 years ago, I was confused. Are they good? Are they bad? What should be in? What should not? What is a seed oil? And was super excited a couple of years ago to meet Jonathan Rubin and then Corey Nelson, our co-founders of Seed Oil Free Alliance, which is now going to give our industry, like the other certification bodies I mentioned, which have done so much good for brands in the industry, a chance to really understand what seed oils are and also be able to express their brands and their products and their SKUs with now an official certification, a first to market, first industry certification, really diving into Seed Oil Free Certified and what that means. And I'm super excited that we could kick it off here with Naturally New York and all of you joining today to have a great conversation and meet our co-founders and learn more. And hopefully, we've been already signing up quite a few dozens of certified brands over the last couple of months since we've launched the program. And we just got back from Newtopia. We had a booth at Newtopia. And I could tell you, as a certification body, we kind of felt like we were launching a new brand at the show. We had a lot of great feedback from Nielsen and Spins and other folks in the industry that are studying the data on seed oils, wanting to really align with us, and a lot of great brands, both small and large, wanting to become certified under this new organization. So Jonathan, Corey, I'm going to kick it over to you and excited to have you share everything with this group today. Happy Friday.
Thank you, Eric. And thank you all so much for attending today. My name is Jonathan Rubin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Seed Oil Free Alliance. You'll meet my co-founder and chief innovation officer, Corey Nelson, in a moment. He will be presenting on the past, present, and future of seed oils in the food supply. You can send questions in the Zoom chat at any time during the presentation, and we hope that you will. We'll have a few brief question and answer breaks during the presentation with a larger Q&A discussion towards the end. Before Corey presents, a little bit about our company for those of you who are not familiar with us yet. Our company is the Seed Oil Free Alliance. We are a third-party certification organization dedicated to advocating and advancing the availability of seed oil-free food options through trust, transparency, and education. And that's our formal mission. As we also like to say, we're helping the food industry switch to healthier oils and fats. We've also created the first ever seed oil-free standards in collaboration with Dr. Andrew Weil, who serves as our scientific and medical advisor. Briefly about what we do. We license the trademarked seed oil-free certified seal to qualifying brands that complete our certification process. Certified brands must refrain from using all seed oils, including soybean, sunflower, and canola in certified products. Our process also includes ISO-accredited lab testing of oil ingredients to ensure purity. Put simply, our aim is to bring transparency to consumers and companies around the oils in our food. Here's how we got started. In 2022 and 2023, I personally experienced significant health benefits by eliminating seed oils from my diet, including losing unwanted weight and reversing inflammatory issues. At the time, I was working as a financial analyst. The idea for this certification came to me while I was shopping for seed oil-free snacks. It struck me, why is it so difficult for consumers to identify seed oil-free products with relative ease and certainty? There's a growing movement of consumers seeking to avoid common seed oils, but it was hard to identify trustworthy options. I soon met Corey while researching the topic. His name came up over and over on the first page of Google as the author of educational articles on seed oils and their health effects. He generously answered my questions about seed oils and observed that a lot of anti-seed oil information floating around on social media wasn't entirely accurate. As we delve deeper into these issues together, we also learned more about the widespread issue of oil adulteration fraud, where premium oils like olive, coconut, and avocado oil are diluted with cheaper seed oils without disclosure, typically at the manufacturing or supplier level. This discovery fueled our vision to help consumers and brands navigate these challenges by creating a sleek, impactful seal that not only sparks public conversation, but also sets the standard for being seed oil free. We believe that changing preferences around seed oils and consumers seeking to avoid them or replace them with higher quality oils and fats will drive significant shifts in the health-conscious food space over the next decade. There are clear indications of this beginning to happen. For example, Julia Mills, Mintel's analyst for U.S. Food and Drink Reports, notes a 150% increase in made with olive oil claims and an 825% surge in made with avocado oil claims from 2019 to 2023. But we're not passively watching trends. We think there is a real opportunity to drive positive change. We understand the importance of providing credible, factual information on these important issues to industry, consumers, and the public at large. I hope you'll find that's reflected in Corey's presentation today. Thank you.
Hello, thanks to everyone for attending. It's an honor to present to you today. Let's start with a very important definition. What are seed oils? In the seed oil free standards, we say seed oils are any liquid edible oil extracted from seeds. A seed oil is literally any oil extracted from a seed, and nuts are a type of seed, by the way. This is really a common sense definition, and it's also what a botanist would tell you. But the most common seed oils today in the US by far are soybean, corn, and canola, which weren't available before the 20th century. These oils require industrial processes to extract efficiently. For example, it takes about 14 ears of corn to make 1 tablespoon of corn oil, 200 soybeans to make a tablespoon of soybean oil, and 5,000 rapeseeds to make a tablespoon of canola oil. This is an unprecedented dietary shift, and as we'll cover, it has important implications. Traditional seed oils like sesame oil, which was available for hundreds of years before modern seed oils, actually account for a very small proportion of seed oils today. And here we have a quote from a Mr. F.G. Mather, writing in Popular Science in 1894 on cottonseed oil. He says, "What was garbage in 1860 was fertilizer in 1870, cattle feed in 1880, and table food and many things else in 1890. This observation by Mr. Mather actually wasn't intended to be critical of cottonseed oil, but it has interesting parallels with modern discussion of seed oils. The most important point here is that the driving factor in the adoption of modern seed oils is the economic factor, namely cost. In the same article, Mr. Mather did also write that, quote, "Table oil often bears the brand of olive oil when it is really cottonseed oil mixed with a small proportion of the olive," which we'll return to shortly. Thanks to Mr. Mather, we'll take a brief detour from the history of seed oil consumption and discuss economically motivated adulteration of oils, EMA for short. The example given here by the FDA is when manufacturers add a cheaper vegetable oil to an expensive olive oil, but sell the product as 100% olive oil, they are cheating their customers. EMA looms large in the discussion around seed oils because seed oils are the most common inexpensive adulterant of premium oils like avocado and olive oil. And like seed oil consumption in general, as we'll discuss shortly, economic factors are the motivator in this type of food fraud. Here we see quite an alarming figure that a study from UC Davis found around 69% of the avocado oil samples that they tested were actually adulterated with cheaper seed oils. As you can see in the references at the bottom there, that was also recently written up in the Washington Post, and I urge anyone interested to read the study and read the article for more information. And I'll note that as we do lab testing at the Seed Oil Free Alliance, we're currently noticing the highest rate of fraud with avocado oil. The prevalence of olive oil adulteration fraud in the US is currently unknown because the last peer-reviewed research was conducted around 2015 and 2016 and had some methodological issues that actually really put it into dispute at the time. There's not more recent data. The consumer perception seems to be that olive oil fraud is very prevalent. That has not been our finding so far at the Seed Oil Free Alliance, but again, we test all fats and oils to ensure purity. And from the brand perspective, I think that there is potentially some value in having a way to indicate to consumers that you've done third-party testing to ensure the purity of oils like particularly avocado oil, but also olive oil. Now we'll pause briefly for one or two questions on the topics I've just touched on, including food fraud. Jonathan, are there any questions in the chat?
There are no questions in the chat.
Okay. Now we'll look at consumption trends, why
I
people...
actually have a question. Sorry to interrupt. I have a question.
Sure.
I want to say thank you to my good friend Johnny Rubin for putting this together with top guys here. This is amazing. I'm in love with this stuff. If someone has a cellular allergy or on a cellular level, they're allergic to products that are in an olive oil or in some sort of substance or oil, and they know that, but a company or a restaurant is saying, oh, here's this oil, put it over your food, or this oil is in our foods, and they go, oh, well, I can have that one, but there's a mixture or it's a faulty style of oil that actually causes severe level, say, allergy reaction in their body. Isn't that a lawsuit? Isn't that a complete danger to the health of the human being that's consuming their food?
I can't speak to the legal side. I mean, I think it's definitely a problem, and I know why you were asking that from the legal side. I can say on the scientific side, there are kind of two issues at play here. Most highly refined oils don't contain allergenic proteins. Now, if you have a peanut allergy or a soy allergy, it's still really between you and your doctor to determine what's safe to consume. So, personally, if I had a peanut allergy, I think that I would stay away from highly refined peanut oil. The trickier part is, as you correctly identified, Austin, that when there are undisclosed ingredients that, we don't know the refining process that's used on an undisclosed seed oil adulterant. Yes, that is a concern. I'm not aware of any legal cases because I have looked for these, but I think it's an issue for sure. And, I feel some empathy for people that may have food allergies that are worried about that. And it's certainly one of the reasons that this is a problem for consumers.
Of course, I appreciate the answer. And, it's just one of those things, like if someone comes up to the table as a server and goes, is there any allergies at the table? Oh, yeah, I can't have shellfish, no peanuts. And the server goes, okay, you can't have this, or this. If the company really knew the danger of what they're providing to people have allergies to a high majority of the base oils provided. Causes swelling, inflammation, acne, rashing. So sorry, I deeply appreciate the answer.
You're welcome. Thank you for the great question.
Yep.
So here on this slide, we see the dramatic increase in seed oil consumption over the last 120 years or so, since modern seed oils first became available. Per capita consumption has increased each decade since the early 20th century by over 1,000-fold for soybean oil, which is the most common seed oil in the US. And today, 20 to 30% of the average American's daily calories come from common seed oils. The lower end figure of 20% is from the USDA's Economic Research Service data as of about 2010 and is likely an underestimation, while the higher 30% figure is based on the most recent United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization per capita consumption figures for seed oils in the US, which I've actually adjusted downward to account for discarded cooking oil and food waste. The vast majority of the seed oil consumed today in the US comes from soybean, corn, and canola, and to a much lesser extent, seed oils like peanut, sunflower, and cottonseed oil. High oleic oils like high oleic sunflower, which we'll revisit, are a small subset of a small subset. As you see here, Americans today consume up to or approximately 57.5% of their calories from what's designated as ultra-processed food and about 20% of calories from restaurant meals. Now, a few of those restaurant items may also count as ultra-processed foods. It's unlikely consumers are intentionally seeking out and consuming seed oils, but busy people tend to choose convenient and readily available foods, which contain seed oils more often than not. Along with ready-to-eat foods, snacks, and restaurant meals, you'll also find seed oils in the majority of dressings, mayonnaises, and other condiments, and inexpensive vegetable oil used for cooking, which is usually soybean oil, sometimes corn oil. Seed oil consumption is so prevalent because they're inexpensive ingredients. Not coincidentally, corn and soy are also the two most heavily subsidized agricultural commodities in the U.S., which results in lower costs and higher availability of those oils. It just makes good business sense to use the least expensive ingredient option when consumers are willing to eat it. Jonathan, are there any audience questions related to historical and present consumption of seed oils?
Not at the moment.
Okay, we'll have more time at the end. For now, we'll cover one more historical aspect to bring us up to date, which is the historical discussion around seed oils, the public conversation. From the very beginning, seed oils have always been marketed as affordable and beneficial for consumer health. In the early 1900s, there were virtually no restrictions on this type of health claim. Crisco was marketed as a healthier fat by Procter & Gamble in the early 20th century. The name Crisco was derived from crystallized cottonseed oil. And it wasn't until 1958 that the Food Additives Amendment was enacted by Congress, requiring manufacturers of new food additives to establish the safety of these new ingredients. This is where the designation, generally recognized as safe or GRAS, as determined by the FDA, originates. The criteria are essentially either based on a long history of use before 1958 or based on scientific studies. Soybean oil and other seed oils were grandfathered in on the basis of their history of use, although they were relatively new ingredients. And in 1990, the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act required all packaged foods to bear nutrition labeling and all health claims for foods to be consistent with terms defined by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and for the first time authorized some health claims for foods. Arguably, seed oils benefited greatly by being introduced before either of these regulatory measures, because they weren't initially regulated either in terms of safety testing as new ingredients or in terms of evidence-based health claims. Now let's examine how the public conversation around seed oils has looked over the years. There wasn't any real scientific support for health claims around seed oils until Ansel Keys and other researchers publicized findings in the 1950s and 60s that polyunsaturated fats lower cholesterol levels, which is true. Here he is on the cover of Time magazine in 1962. Cholesterol isn't the only potential outcome you could measure, but it only takes a few weeks to measure lower cholesterol levels from seed oils, and the American Heart Association began recommending replacing saturated fats with vegetable oils high in polyunsaturated fats, that is, seed oils, in 1961. And it's interesting to note that Procter & Gamble had recently provided major funding that allowed the AHA to grow to prominence. This time period was also when the term vegetable oil became more popular in marketing seed oils. Technically, a vegetable oil is any oil made from any part of a plant. There aren't any cooking oils made from actual vegetables. For example, olive and avocado oil, which have very different fatty acids than seed oils, would be better described as fruit oils. But vegetable oil sounds healthy, like eating your veggies. The precursors to today's conversation about seed oils first began in the late 80s and early 90s. That's where we see concepts like the omega-6 ratio and polyunsaturated fats emerge into public discussion from voices dissenting to the widespread promotion of seed oils. And here we have a rather obscure author named G.G. Peak using the term omega-6 excess polyunsaturated folly in 1988. We have Dr. Andrew Weil discussing the concept of unstable polyunsaturated fats. In the 90s and 2000s, we have the idea of the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio emerging into public health discussion among health-conscious consumers. And in the 2010s, we have Dr. Kate Shanahan coining the term hateful eight vegetable oils. But to the average person, these terms didn't have much meaning. And again, vegetable oil just sounds healthy. This is Google Trends data from 2004 to the present. Until recently, this issue had a branding problem. We believe that the term seed oils, which is not a new term in the industry but is relatively new to consumers, makes the discussion much more accessible. As you can see from these graphs, the introduction of the term seed oils into public consciousness has resulted in much higher levels of interest and awareness, which we see paralleled on social media. The second graph shows the same data, but with searches for seed oils overlaid for relative search volume. The term also allows consumers to observe the prevalence of seed oils for themselves by reading ingredients lists more easily, whereas omega-6 and polyunsaturated fats don't directly correlate to what consumers can read on ingredient labels. Also, not shown here, searches for the singular term seed oil have been about 30% higher than searches for the term vegetable oil for several years now. That's very significant in terms of public awareness because people are searching to learn more about the term seed oil. Jonathan, are there any audience questions about topics we've covered so far?
Not at the moment.
Now we'll talk about why some consumers are avoiding seed oils and the people who have a problem with that. This image is a still from a Discovery Channel documentary on how canola oil is made. You'll find that under the also list here. The manufacturing looks icky. I would make the case that that does not really speak to health issues. It's more of an ingredient quality concern, but I think that the visual of how canola oil is made and other seed oils are made has certainly resulted in greater awareness of these issues. I think that the good reasons that some consumers, like the most defensible reasons that some consumers are avoiding seed oils, are that they're very high in omega-6 and polyunsaturated fats, which lead to a couple of different issues that we'll discuss. And also just that they're highly refined empty calories, which does relate to the manufacturing method. So compared to something like an extra virgin olive oil, a highly refined seed oil is much lower in nutrients and antioxidants and other beneficial compounds that are responsible for many of the health benefits of something like extra virgin olive oil. Social media awareness is a huge factor. You'll hear people compare seed oils to engine lubricant, which I think is a very tangible and compelling comparison. Unfortunately, the problem with saying that seed oils can be used as engine lubricant is that any fat can and has been used as engine lubricant, including olive oil, lard, and tallow, which are not seed oils. So that's something that I think is a little off the mark, but it's what we're seeing currently in the social media discussion. And some anti-seed oil crusaders do tend to exaggerate the available evidence, which we'll look at now. It's important that we take a high-level look at evidence that's led to concern around seed oil consumption, because soon we're also going to be hearing about some outspoken individuals who say there's no reason whatsoever to be concerned about seed oils. Now, I'm going to help you understand some of the most important evidence, but it's not an exhaustive summary by any means. Seed oils are by far the biggest contributor to high omega-6 intake and have resulted in skewed omega-6 to omega-3 ratios compared to norms from any previous period in human history. This UK Biobank study, top left, had over 85,000 participants and looked at plasma ratios of omega-6 to omega-3, finding that the study participants with the highest omega-6 to omega-3 ratios experienced 26% higher total mortality, 14% higher cancer mortality, and 31% higher cardiovascular disease mortality over a 13-year period compared to the lowest quintile. That is, comparing the 20% of people with the highest ratio against the 20% of people with the lowest ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fats. This study isn't perfect, but its strengths are that it relies on actual measurements and it has a large sample size with a long follow-up period. The study on the top right was published in the British Medical Journal in 2016 by Christopher Ramsden, a U.S. National Institutes of Health researcher, and his research group. They analyzed unpublished data from the Minnesota coronary experiment, a randomized controlled trial where over 9,000 participants were followed from 1967 to 73. The trial compared a cholesterol-lowering diet containing corn oil to replace saturated fat, while the control diet was high in saturated animal fats, common margarines, and shortenings. The intervention did result in lower cholesterol, but the results not only indicated no health benefit in the intervention group, they actually found that for each 30 milligrams per deciliter of cholesterol lowering, individuals from that group had a 22% higher risk of death. The one potential flaw in this study is that both groups did consume trans fats, which was normal at the time, but it's highly likely that the intervention diet was designed to contain less trans fat. Fascinatingly, Ansel Keys was actually a principal investigator in the trial with unpublished data. We can't know all the reasons the data wasn't published at the time, but it's certainly the case that the findings were directly contrary to Keys' lipid heart hypothesis, the work that got him on the cover of Time magazine a few years earlier. The Sydney Diet Heart Study discussed in the paper on the lower left was conducted 1966 to 73. It's a smaller randomized controlled trial that provided safflower oil, another seed oil, to the intervention group in place of other fats, and the results were published, but were actually missing data on mortality. So the original findings published just suggested that there was a cholesterol-lowering effect to the intervention, which was considered a beneficial outcome. When Ramsden evaluated the mortality results using data recovered from one of the original researchers who had retired and which was stored on a 9-track magnetic tape, he found, and his group found, that the intervention group eating safflower oil had higher rates of death, cardiovascular disease, and coronary heart disease, approximately 60 to 75% higher relative risk for each of those outcomes over the duration of the trial. According to results from the 8-year-long Los Angeles Veterans Study, not shown here, but published in 1969, conducted by the American Heart Association, which was a trial including over 800 veterans, the men receiving diets high in omega-6 linoleic acid from corn, soybean, safflower, and cottonseed oil were 82% more likely to die of cancer compared to the control group. To their credit, the researchers did publish these findings separately at the time regarding cancer, but the main abstract for the trial construes the results as beneficial. So they sidelined the unfavorable results and published them separately. These randomized controlled trials are important because they're the largest of their kind and suffer from less selection bias and other issues in terms of the participants, groupings, and dietary changes compared to other similar interventional trials. But actually, almost all of the RCT data we have on seed oil consumption is from around this same time period, because it was essentially accepted as settled science that seed oils are benign and beneficial, hence why the recovered data is very important in 2 of the trials I shared. Also, this type of trial is very expensive and time-consuming, which is another reason we don't see these anymore. Moving on, as you can see in the graph on the bottom middle from the Nestle Nutrition Institute, omega-6 linoleic acid accumulates in breast milk. So, as consumption of seed oils increases, these levels also increase. Numerous studies not shown have documented higher incidences of fertility issues, issues during pregnancy, and motor and cognitive delays and impairments occurring in children of mothers with very high levels of omega-6 linoleic acid from seed oils compared to lower levels. This is a very uncomfortable topic you'll never see discussed when someone claims to be debunking seed oil concerns. Finally, let's talk about why smoke point is misleading. This is about the degradation of seed oils when they're heated, which is basically a separate issue from the omega-6 intake issue. The polyunsaturated fats found in seed oils have 2 or more double bonds, compared to 1 double bond for monounsaturated fats like you find in olive oil, or no double bonds in the case of saturated fats. And for the most common seed oils are all high in polyunsaturated fats. This makes them much more fragile and prone to degrade when heated. And the point at which this occurs is well below the smoke point of seed oils. In fact, they're marketed as having high smoke points of around 450 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very misleading because they begin to degrade and form harmful byproducts very quickly, well before they reach their smoke point. The study on the lower right demonstrates this occurs within 30 minutes of heating in a pan to 220 Celsius, which is about 428 degrees Fahrenheit. And the seed oils formed significantly higher levels of byproducts than olive oil or algae oil, which are high in monounsaturated fats. Keep in mind, this is above the smoke point you've been told for olive oil, but below that of seed oils, most seed oils. The byproducts formed during heating include measurable levels of trans fats, aldehydes, hydroxyalkanols, polymers, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. This is especially an issue in food service where fryer oil is reused for days on end, but it's also a concern in CPG production, home cooking, and anywhere seed oils are heated. Jonathan, is there one question that relates to any of these topics that I've covered recently?
Yeah, I suppose so. So this is from Brett. I didn't know that seed oils were so bad for you. I'm happy for guys like you to educate us all. If I do substitute seed oils, do I have a lot of options? And if I am getting anything good from seed oils, do I need to add any supplements if I make this switch?
Sure. So on the final part of that question, seed oils do contain omega-6 fats, and particularly linoleic acid is an essential fatty acid, meaning that our bodies can't make it. However, we only need to get about 1 to 2% of our calories from linoleic acid, which you can easily do by eating a well-rounded diet. It's found in low levels in animal products, eating things like whole food sources or of nuts, corn, nut butters. I think most people that don't have like a bowel absorption condition and are not receiving like hospital nutrition are extremely unlikely to develop a any deficiency. We could talk more about that at the end. And really all of the other, like the tocopherols and antioxidants are mostly stripped out of seed oils. So I would make the case that no one is going to, no reasonably healthy person who is eating a well-rounded diet is going to develop any deficiency from eliminating seed oils. And we could talk more about substitutes at the end, but the other thought that comes up from that question is that people's like the average person today actually has enough stored linoleic acid in their adipose tissue. Your adipose tissue is like 25 to 30% linoleic acid, up from a much lower level a century ago. And even if you consume no linoleic acid, there's actually enough to last a year or two without developing a deficiency. And thank you, by the way, for the kind words about the evidence presented so far. And now we're going to take an honest look at arguments in favor of eating seed oils. So hands down, the most persuasive argument in favor or in defense of seed oils would be large-scale observational data, which we'll cover shortly. The worst is the essential fatty acid argument because, people today are getting at least 7% of their calories from linoleic acid, probably more like 10% when the requirement is 1 to 2%. So people that, you'll read in some popular articles that, oh, seed oils have an essential fatty acid that you need. That's very misleading because people are consuming so much more than they need. Ignoring evidence, I think, is something that we see really commonly in defense of seed oils. Straw man, so finding the worst argument against seed oils on social media and responding to that instead of responding to real evidence that raises concerns. Blaming ultra processed foods and saying it's not the seed oils, it's the ultra processed foods that they're in, is a poor argument. Politics, as you can see here with this lovely article from Rolling Stone, trying to make it a political issue. Our experience has been that There's absolutely no political element to this when we discuss it with companies or consumers. And high oleic seed oils, which are low in linoleic acid, this is a step in the right direction as far as lowering intake of omega-6 fats and better stability. But some people defend all seed oils by saying, oh, but what about high oleic seed oils? Well, like I mentioned earlier, those are a small subset of a small subset of seed oils that people are actually consuming. And we could talk more about that at the end. Now, I'm going to play a 90-second clip from you. We have a Professor Sarah Berry, PhD and nutrition researcher at King's College London, speaking on a podcast called Zoe, published 1 week ago today. The title of the episode is Seed Oils Are Not Evil. They could lower your risk of disease. And I will have to start that audio.
That overall we're all eating vastly more seed oil than we were in the past, and we know that we are seeing the explosion of health issues, right? Whether that's living with obesity or diabetes or just this whole host, right, of health issues.
Corey, can you turn your speakers up?
First things that people claiming seed oils to be toxic use is beautiful infographics, beautiful figures that show, you know, a nice chart where you see on one axis of this figure increase in seed oil intake, and on the other axis you see increase in cardiovascular disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes. You know, think of all of these chronic related diseases that are increasing over the last 50 years. And you see this almost linear relationship, as we call it. So as your intake of seed oil increases, so does the level of all of these different diseases over the years.
So that sounds pretty bad.
Yes, it does. But that's association. It doesn't mean causation. And what is really alarming here is that it's ignoring everything else that's happening over the last 50 years. The fact that actually these seed oils are typically now eaten as part of these very heavily processed unhealthy foods. So actually the majority of our intake of seed oils comes from these cereal-based foods, so pastries, from cakes and these kind of foods. And so it's not the seed oils themselves that are causing this, it's the ingredients, that all of the other ingredients in these foods. But
Okay, so she's not entirely wrong with her statement, because it's true that there's insufficient evidence to say that seed oils are the sole cause of all of these problems, which is a straw man, by the way, let's note for the record. And she does go on after I stopped the clip, she does go on to talk about physical activity levels and stress. But this is a very good example of passing the buck to ultra-processed foods. The problem with her statement about food is that she has zero proof of what she's saying. It just sounds true. We'll also come back shortly to her point about correlation versus causation, which I think you'll find interesting. As a brief aside, these graphs from the USDA Economic Research Service data show that Dr. Berry is incorrect that consumption of total sugar and cereal grains have increased in parallel with seed oils during the 20th and 21st centuries. You can clearly see that consumption of these foods is relatively stable. On the left, we have per capita caloric sweetener availability, 1970 to 2020. And the dotted line up top on the left accounts for everything sugary that's added to food and beverages. On the right, looking at flour and cereal products, the blue line shows flour and cereal products declined for most of the 20th century before leveling off and rising modestly, but not to previous levels. I mentioned a moment ago that large-scale observational data is the most persuasive evidence cited in favor of seed oil consumption. Here's an example of that, which was published just a few weeks ago. Briefly, the study of nearly 258,000 people found that for individuals with higher plasma levels of omega-6 linoleic acid, there was a 20% overall lower risk of death compared to individuals with the lowest plasma levels. and a similar risk reduction for cardiovascular disease and cancer. Let's momentarily set aside those other omega-6 fats they measured that were associated with a 12% higher risk of death. I want you to ask yourself if you feel persuaded that this information justifies eating seed oils, because that's clearly what the authors think. As you can see from their conclusion, which states, these findings support recommendations to maintain, if not increase, current linoleic acid intakes, by which they mean seed oils, and specifically say so elsewhere in the paper. I have no doubt that this will be cited in popular articles in defense of seed oils very soon. Now, the highlighted sentence in the conclusion paragraph there also shows that there is some assumption of causality. In other words, the authors are inferring from their own data that if people are less likely to die when their linoleic acid blood levels are higher, it must be beneficial to do things that raise linoleic acid levels, which would be eating seed oils. But this is not actually supported by their data, because their data shows an association between higher linoleic acid and better health outcomes. There's no way to demonstrate causality, as could be achieved in a randomized controlled trial, which is why we looked over the RCTs earlier. Another assumption that the authors make in drawing that conclusion, and they're transparent about it, is that higher intakes of seed oils must be the most important determinant of higher plasma levels of linoleic acid. But this is also not supported by their data. It's absolutely true that eating more seed oils will result in higher plasma levels of linoleic acid, but it's not demonstrable from this data set that the people with the highest plasma levels of this omega-6 fat were eating the most seed oils. This study didn't even attempt to collect dietary intake data. That assumption, again, is totally unsupported. Even if the study did account for dietary intake being the driving factor, there's a confounding factor known as healthy user bias that would come into play. People have been receiving health advice from authorities for about 60 years that says eating seed oils is healthy. That means people who listen to other public health advice, such as wear your seatbelt, wash your hands, brush and floss twice a day, don't drink to excess, don't smoke tobacco, and exercise regularly, are also more likely to eat more seed oils compared to people that don't listen to public health advice. In this case, blood levels of linoleic acid could just be serving as a measurement of how likely someone is to follow all of the above advice, most of which is valid. But again, the main point here was that this is the most persuasive evidence cited in favor of seed oil consumption. Hold on to your current thoughts about this one for now. Here are the biggest problems with observational studies on seed oils. Everyone today is eating a large amount of seed oils, except for the minority of people who make efforts to avoid them on a daily basis. They accumulate in tissues, including adipose tissue or body fat, and in plasma, which is what studies like the one by Harris et al. I just covered measure. You can see from the plot graph here that average tissue levels have more than doubled since the 1950s, from around 10% to nearly 25%. This is due to dietary intake, but the problem is that the study from the last slide we just looked at is measuring extremely high levels versus very high levels in plasma in the general population today. It's not actually measuring a low intake of seed oils compared to a high intake, as you might assume. And pulling numbers from the Harris et al. Study from the previous slide, now shown on the lower left slide, each quintile difference was only around a 1% absolute difference in plasma, about 5% difference from highest to lowest. A quintile, by the way, is a grouping looking at 5 different slices of all of the individuals in the study according to the lowest, next to lowest, middle, next to highest, and highest levels. Equally importantly, dietary intake of seed oils is not the only determinant of plasma or tissue levels of omega-6 linoleic acid. Smoking, drinking alcohol, obesity, and metabolic syndrome, for example, all result in lower levels of linoleic acid. In other words, if two twins are eating the same amount of seed oils, but one of them smokes or drinks, etc., the twin with unhealthy behaviors will have measurably lower levels of plasma linoleic acid. Part of this is metabolic. So the omega-6 fat is then converting to other, the omega-6 linoleic acid is in various ways converting to byproducts, including other omega-6 fats, which, by the way, relates to those higher levels of other omega-6 fats being correlated with a higher risk of death. And for that process to occur, there has to be a reduction in the plasma linoleic acid levels to create the byproducts. Lastly, here's a bar graph from a study with over 3,000 participants conducted in the early 90s and analyzed later, published in 2007. About 350 of them developed type 2 diabetes during the 4-year study. All of these vertical bars measure plasma omega-6 linoleic acid at baseline, meaning no one had developed diabetes yet when that measurement was taken. The first thing that should stand out to you is that we're looking at very small differences in each of the two sides of the graph here, meaning that the lowest levels on the Q1 on the left are not numerically very different from the highest levels. The spread is very small compared to the plot graph on the upper left. The second thing that's very interesting is that people who went on to develop diabetes during that 4-year period, which are the vertical bars on the right-hand side of the bar graph, were actually eating slightly more linoleic acid from seed oils, according to the dietary survey provided as part of the study shown at bottom right. They were eating about 12.2 grams of linoleic acid per day compared to 11.28 in people who didn't develop diabetes. But at baseline, again, before they developed type 2 diabetes, their blood levels of omega-6 linoleic acid were significantly lower than people who would not develop diabetes, despite that higher intake of seed oils. This and other factors like smoking and alcohol consumption mean that studies like the Harris et al. 2024 study I showed you on the last slide are more likely confounded by pre-existing health problems or behaviors that aren't properly diagnosed or accounted for and aren't even measuring meaningful dietary differences between individuals. Using the type of inference the 2024 study used for the Hodge data on the right side of this slide would actually suggest that omega-6 fats are protective against diabetes, which would be a highly inappropriate conclusion. What's reasonable? Keep in mind that today's seed oil intake is a relatively new and very significant change in the history of human diets. I'd like you to consider this. What we don't have is certainty, but we do often see people from either side of this issue claiming to have certainty. It can be uncomfortable to deal with potential risks from a position of uncertainty. Those risks can include potential health ramifications, as we've discussed, or risk to one's career or reputation for taking a strong position that seed oils are entirely benign. Personally, I think the reasonable position here is not that the burden of proof is on anyone to prove that seed oils are unsafe, but rather on anyone claiming they're benign to prove that conclusively. The evidence is mixed, is just not a good argument in favor of seed oils. I think it's perfectly reasonable for consumers to say, no thanks, I don't want to risk it. And there's no downside to not eating seed oils, by the way. You won't develop any nutrient deficiencies, and it doesn't require that you increase your intake of saturated fats either. Let's look at some industry funding and how the defense of seed oils in the public conversation works. Here we've got articles from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, Popular Science, 130 years after Mr. F.G. Mather I quoted earlier, an article from the American Heart Association, and my personal favorite, the Seed Oil Coalition, which formed to fight misinformation on social media. These articles are generally not very informative and tend to repeat the same talking points. Influencers on social media are saying seed oils are toxic, but they're wrong. But it doesn't appear that telling people what to think, to stop worrying and keep eating seed oils, is a successful strategy, because that only seems to make more people aware of the controversy. Now, I'm not saying that people defending seed oils are lying, but we can clearly see conflicts of interest. We know that big business is willing to spend money on PR campaigns to avoid losing money. And plenty of different experts and authorities have said for decades that high seed oil consumption is beneficial. It's a reputational risk if they're wrong or perceived as being wrong. And if you're viewed as an expert or authority, publicly changing your position on this would be going out on a limb, particularly if your colleagues haven't done so. It could be difficult to even consider changing your view. There's almost a sense of desperation from people defending seed oils in the public sphere. For example, Dr. Berry in the Zoe podcast used the word misinformation to describe opposition to seed oils, not in the clip I played for you. And yet she got some important facts wrong in her claims that you heard. Today, using the word misinformation is tantamount to saying that this discussion should be censored on social media. That's a double standard. There's a saying that science progresses one retirement at a time. And there is actually credible research confirming that when highly prominent researchers exit their fields, the scientific tide tends to shift on issues as researchers with opposing views are better able to receive funding and to publish. I think that we could be on the brink of that with the seed oil issue. And there are already plenty of scientists publishing research that challenges the conventional paradigm. These excerpts you see are examples of a very recent shift, literally occurring within the past year, which I was referring to when I mentioned the public conversation around seed oils is improving in the description of the presentation. So we have Cleveland Clinic saying, often found in ultra-processed foods, these oils can cause inflammation and disease. We have Hone Health saying that experts are divided on whether they're healthy, which I think is a very fair statement. Hone Health also says omega-6 fats are healthy when eaten in small amounts, but when eaten in excess may contribute to chronic low-grade inflammation. Healthline.com says, while these oils can be a healthy source of fat, some varieties are better choices than others. It's worth noting that they're lumping vegetable oils in, which includes olive oil and avocado oil, with seed oils, which can also qualify as vegetable oils. All the excerpts here are from articles ranked highly in Google search results, totaling hundreds of thousands or millions of page views per year. All of them are written by or have been reviewed by registered dietitians. These articles are not perfect and contain some factual errors, but there's real progress here in terms of willingness to discuss the issue honestly. These are major websites, and it's clear they're looking to provide nuance on this issue rather than dismiss concerns people have about seed oils. With some discernment, we may detect reluctance to frame the issue starkly, and none of the articles actually mention how high consumption levels today really are. But saying seed oils might be too much of a good thing, as the Hone Health article states, is better than telling people there's no cause for concern whatsoever, which is false. As we reach the end of the presentation now, before an extended Q&A discussion, I want to ask you this question. Do consumers want to eat seed oils? All else aside, given ingredient transparency and alternative choices, will people choose to consume seed oils? Let's find out.
Thank you, Corey. So we do have a couple of questions that we can address, and that was the end of our presentation. So we'll start from the top. Diluting and false geographic indication is a problem. I am with Culinary Argan Oil. Can you talk about your opinion on this oil? Culinary Argan Oil.
So we do have two categories in our seed oil free standards. I mentioned earlier that we have the very straightforward definition of a seed oil, any liquid edible oil extracted from a seed. But for consumer education purposes, we have two categories of seed oils. We have high concern seed oils, which includes the most common, highly refined, high polyunsaturated, and generally high omega-6 seed oils like soybean, corn, and canola oil. Argan oil is in a different category for us, which we call low concern. So because of our branding decision to be called seed oil free certified, we don't allow any seed oils in products, but similar to sesame oil or high oleic seed oils, we're not taking a position against these low concern seed oils. I will note that there are consumers that want to avoid anything that can be called a seed oil, and they can trust our seal. But as an organization, we do differentiate between low concern and high concern seed oils.
And on a similar topic, I've come across oils made from superfood seeds, such as pumpkin seeds, using a cold pressed process, which seems to be healthier alternatives to cheap industrial processed seed oils. Wouldn't these oils be better than adulterated avocado or olive oils? I'm wondering if your lab could evaluate the quality of these oils. If they are proven to be truly high quality, it could send a positive signal to the industry.
Well, oil, there's a very specific definition of oil quality in the kind of science of fats, and that would be how degraded are the fatty acids. And in the case of something like olive oil, how many of the polyphenols are still intact. Over time, any oil of any type will degrade and form these byproducts. Seed oils just tend to do it faster because those polyunsaturated fats are unstable. My opinion on something like pumpkin oil, it's in our low concern category. I don't have the fatty acid composition in front of me, but just about all seed oils are high in polyunsaturated fats. So if I was looking for those benefits, I would eat pumpkin seeds personally, and I would be wary of using. Um, I would be if I were a CPG company, I would be wary of using. I understand part of the reason is because either people like it or it looks good on the ingredients list, but from a technical perspective, I would be wary of using something like pumpkin oil because of that degradation issue. So these are a few separate but related things. And I would still keep it as a consumer. I would keep it separate in my mind from soybean, corn, canola, and high concern seed oils. But my general concern around any seed oil in a product that sits on a shelf or sits on in a bottle on a shelf at a restaurant is that the quality is actually degrading relatively quickly.
You mentioned a reasonably healthy person eating a well-balanced diet should see no deficiencies when removing seed oils. Would you not expect the same reasonably healthy person who does consume seed oils as a part of a balanced diet to see no adverse health effects?
It depends on how we define a balanced diet. If you stipulate that a balanced diet means you're not consuming 20 to 30% of your calories from seed oils, that's definitely an improvement. We don't have good enough evidence to say what level is ideal. We know that historically, people never consumed these until 120 years ago. So, I don't think that there's evidence to say that these are really beneficial at any level. I think that, when we say a reasonably healthy person, I should clarify, I was talking about like absorption from the gut. So somebody that's had like bowel resectioning surgery or has a really serious gut absorption issue. And I don't really mean in the alternative medicine sense. I mean like a diagnosis of, you know, we've removed half of your bowel. That's where you actually see people who are unable to absorb linoleic acid. It tends to be very absorbable for the vast majority of the population who's outside of a hospital or kind of intensive treatment situation like that. As to whether seed oils are benign as part of a balanced diet, which different people would define differently, I think that's why we're going to leave it up to the consumer to decide. But I do believe that anyone who's saying that it's a good idea to consume 20 to 30% of your calories from highly refined seed oils, I think that they should prove that. And there are a lot of people making that claim. Personally, I don't think that they've proved it, but I am absolutely in favor of consumer choice on eating what you think is best for you.
Concerning coconut oil, are there any purity concerns?
Much less common for two reasons. One is because it's solid at room temperature, so it's hard. You can't just add a liquid. You can't easily add a liquid soybean oil to it. It would separate, and the kind of economics of it most tropical oils are relatively inexpensive to produce. So you're looking at kind of like shipping and export costs. So coconut oil, there's less economic incentive. There have been documented cases of coconut oil adulteration, and we do think it's very important to test them because of the seed oil free seal does serve as a packaging claim, and we want to protect companies and consumers. But on the scale, I could say this: we retest olive oil and avocado oil once a year for companies. Coconut oil, because it's a lower risk of adulteration, we retest it every 3 years as far as the certification process.
What are the best cooking oils to cook with? Best high smoke point cooking oil?
Well, I think if I'm cooking at like 500 degrees, I just want to blacken something or make it, sear it. You can use cast iron with no oil. It's not a great idea to heat any oil up to that level, regardless of the smoke point. If you absolutely have to, these newer algae oils or cultured oils made through fermentation, which would include 0 Acre, Algae Cooking Club, and on the wholesale side, Spotlight. Those do claim a smoke point of over 500 degrees. I don't think there's a lot of benefit to pushing them to that point. My general cooking tip would be, you can do most things at 350 to 375 Fahrenheit and get the results that you want. If you need to sear it separately, dry, do that. Kind of the evidence on stability of fats is that saturated fats are the most stable as far as oxidation. People may choose to avoid saturated fats because they can raise your cholesterol, total HDL, good cholesterol, and LDL, what's called bad cholesterol. But if you want the absolute most stable fat, somewhat irrespective of the smoke point, it would be saturated fats. If you want something that is not going to raise your cholesterol but is more stable than seed oils, it would be avocado oil or olive oil. You never want to see the oil smoking in the pan, but if you keep any of these oils around 375 degrees Fahrenheit maximum, you won't run into problems with degradation of the oils. So again, I think smoke point is very misleading, and I think it only serves as really a marketing term for seed oils, because the point at which they visibly begin to smoke is way past the point where they're forming harmful byproducts. And maybe with just little changes to cooking techniques and heating, there can be a way to, and switching to some of the oils I mentioned, there can be a way to not worry about smoke point and address this issue for the consumer.
Does anybody have additional questions? I think we covered all the questions in the chat.
Well, I want to just quickly thank Jonathan and Corey for their time today and sharing all their insights. I hope everybody found this information helpful. We will be sharing the presentation in addition to their contact information in case you want to follow up with any additional questions. That concludes today's session. We'll look forward to seeing you at the next. Thank you all.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you.